A cargo plane took off with $2.4 million and never landed. What happened next still haunts the FBI. In the vast wilderness of Alaska, where silence stretches for miles and snow blankets everything in sight, something unusual happened that few would have ever expected. It all started on January 12, 2014, when a twin-engine cargo plane carrying nearly $2.4 million in cash was scheduled to fly from Anchorage to a remote bank branch in the tiny town of Coldfoot, a location only reachable by air during that season. The cash was meant to replenish the isolated branch's reserves after the harsh holidays spending left their vaults nearly empty. At first, it seemed like just another day. Freezing temperatures, whiteout conditions, and the kind of bone-deep cold that Alaskan pilots knew all too well. The plane, operated by a small private logistics company, North Ridge Freight, was one of only 3 in their fleet, and their most experienced pilot, 49-year-old Sam Dorsey, was trusted with the mission. A former Air Force pilot turned cargo runner, Sam was well known in the region for his calm under pressure and a reputation for never, ever missing a delivery. But what nobody knew, not his employers, not the client bank, and definitely not the dispatcher who signed off the route that morning, was that this flight would never reach Coldfoot. Because Sam Dorsey wasn't planning to land there at all. 3 months before that cold January morning, Sam met someone who would completely change the direction of his life, 32-year-old Lena Brooks, a former cybersecurity engineer who'd vanished from the tech world after being accused of a massive data breach in 2010. Though the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, Lena had disappeared without a trace, retreating into a quieter, more dangerous kind of life. She and Sam crossed paths at a small bar near the Anchorage docks, one of those places where no one asked questions, and everyone had something to hide. They hit it off fast. Both were running from something, Sam from a past crash that left him grounded for over a year and haunted by the death of his co-pilot, and Lena from a world that painted her as a criminal despite never catching her red-handed. Within weeks, they were spending nearly every night together, talking about the way the world. Back in the day, Sam used to fly military cargo planes overseas. But after a severe accident in 2007 during a stormy landing in Guam, he was discharged and grounded for over a year while recovering. Though cleared to fly again eventually, he never quite returned to his old self. The thrill was gone. Something about that near-death experience had shifted the way he saw the world. He switched to small private flights, slower, quieter, less attention. But what he didn't realize at the time was that this quiet work would lead him right into something bigger than he'd ever faced in uniform. Now, Lena wasn't just some tech dropout. Before she vanished from Silicon Valley, she was on track to become one of the top cybersecurity minds in the country. She had a mind for patterns, for systems, and, most importantly, for finding the cracks where nobody else was looking. After walking away from everything, she spent years off-grid, couch hopping, moving through Canada, Montana, eventually settling in Alaska, where the internet barely mattered and privacy was a way of life. That's where she met Sam. The idea didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, it started as a joke. One night, snow piling up against the bar windows, Lena leaned over and asked, "What if we just took the plane and vanished? You fly, I plan, we disappear." Sam laughed it off at first. But she didn't. Over the next few weeks, the joke became something more serious. Lena had been watching. She'd noticed that once every quarter, North Ridge Freight delivered high-volume cash shipments to Coldfoot. This wasn't typical business. This was discreet, unmarked bundles, flown out under the radar to avoid the expense of armored road transport in winter. No GVs. No onboard guards. Just a flight manifest and trust. Then came the third piece of the puzzle. Mike Jensen, a 41-year-old wilderness guide turned gold prospector, who knew the Alaskan backcountry better than any map. Lena met him while repairing a satellite modem at a ranger station where he worked during off-season. When she told him about the plan, cautiously, not fully, he listened. Then he asked one question, "What's the escape route?" They brought him in. Now the 3 of them had the skills. Sam could fly under radar. Lena could forge the manifests and reroute the tracking logs. And Mike knew where to land a plane without anyone seeing it. Where to hide. Where not even satellites bothered looking. Everything was coming together. But, as with every great plan, it was only a matter of time before things got complicated. By late December, things were in motion. The fake Cessna was nearly operational, though the process had taken longer than expected. Sam spent his days flying legitimate deliveries with Northridge, while his nights were devoted to retrofitting the ghost plane. He replaced parts that would have raised suspicions in an inspection: transponder units, tail numbers, even the cockpit seats were swapped to match the original model specs. Mason handled the welding, reinforcing the fuselage just in case things went sideways during the final flight. Meanwhile, Lena was working through layers of digital fog. She set up fake maintenance logs in Northridge's system using credentials she'd lifted from a repair technician during a routine airport bar hangout. Then she began altering the company's flight archives, past and future, to make it look like a completely different pilot and plane were scheduled for the January 12th run to Coldfoot. Every detail had to be exact. Flight path, manifest, weather clearance, fuel logs, even coffee preferences on the pilot checklist. But with the date fast approaching, tensions were building. Mason, usually quiet and methodical, began growing impatient. He didn't trust Lena's digital magic. "You can erase a signal," he said, "but you can't erase a human mistake." Sam tried to play the mediator, but it was obvious the partnership was under pressure. 3 people, each with their own demons, depending on one another for a plan that could only work if no one cracked. Then came the curveball. On January 3rd, Sam was told by dispatch that his plane would be grounded for maintenance, not his usual one, but the exact model they were using for the heist. A random check had flagged inconsistencies in the fuel pressure reports. Suddenly, they were in a bind. If they didn't act soon, the trail could lead back to the hangar, and worse, to Lena's edits. That night, they met at the cabin, a small, heatless shack Mason used for trapping and hiding out. Sam laid it out: "We do it early. 10 days earlier. January 5th. That gives us one shot." Lena hesitated. "I need at least 3 days to rewrite the schedule and clear the airstrip." Mason didn't blink. "You've got 2. It was settled. They were moving up the timeline. One mistake now, and the whole plan, 2 months of work, countless risks, would collapse in a single radio transmission. January 5th came colder than anyone expected. The temperature had dropped below -30, and the winds coming off the Kuskokwim Mountains made the runway feel like a frozen runway straight out of Siberia. Sam woke up before sunrise, dressed in layers, and drove to the Northridge hangar as if it were any other day. Everything had to feel routine: the walk, the flight briefing, the radio check. He couldn't afford even a flicker of nerves. Lena had already been up all night. She'd remotely logged into the airport's scheduling system using a proxy network bouncing between Romania and Brazil. She inserted a fake technician's clearance note authorizing the flight under a temporary call sign, NRX 405A, a code that wouldn't flag anything in the automated logs but would bypass the company's dispatch checks. It was brilliant and dangerous. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Sam got the go-ahead. He taxied the Northridge aircraft, the real one, out of the hangar for a supposed supply run to Talkeetna. Meanwhile, Mason was already en route in a decoy truck with sealed supply crates filled with weighted sandbags, designed to match the weight of a real cash payload. The actual money had already been loaded into the ghost Cessna the night before, tucked into storage compartments beneath the floorboards and behind false panels along the cabin walls. The switch was seamless. Sam flew the real plane for 10 minutes, then made an unscheduled detour under low altitude to a remote airstrip just west of Lake Minchumina, where Mason had parked the ghost Cessna under camo netting. No radar coverage. No eyes. He landed, shut down the real plane, and within 20 minutes, had switched to the fake. Now he was flying blind. No transponder, no flight path, no call sign. The weather was on their side. Heavy overcast meant that even if someone had been watching from above, they wouldn't have seen much. Lena was tracking the air traffic chatter from a hidden uplink in Mason's shack, scanning for keywords or alerts that might indicate anyone had caught wind of the deviation. Nothing. So far, so good. Sam touched down on an abandoned airstrip near the Yukon border, one that hadn't seen a legal landing in over 12 years. Within minutes, Mason pulled up in a snowmobile rigged with a sled, and together they began unloading the cash into sealed waterproof barrels. The barrels were buried immediately under a pre-dug snowpack, marked only with a set of GPS coordinates Mason had memorized but never written down. Back in Anchorage, the real plane sat on the ground, locked, engines cold. The weighted crates had been left in the cargo hold to buy time. When discovered, they'd delay the realization that the real payload was missing. Lena scheduled a false maintenance alert to trigger exactly 2 hours after the swap. Just enough time for Sam to disappear across the border. But as they were covering the last barrel, Mason paused. "You hear that?" It was faint, just a low hum. Far off. A plane. Not scheduled. Not theirs. And it was getting closer. They froze. Sam and Mason ducked behind the snowmobile as the faint roar of an engine grew louder over the ridge. The sky was still blanketed in thick clouds, but they could hear it. A small aircraft, maybe a scouting plane or a government patrol making an unscheduled pass. Lena's timing had been nearly perfect, but not perfect enough. The plane didn't descend. It simply passed overhead and faded into the distance. No spotlight, no radio ping, no indication they'd been spotted. Still, the tension didn't fade. Mason looked at Sam, narrowed his eyes, and said, "We finish now, or we leave it." They finished. By 1 p.m., all the cash had been buried and marked, the sled tracks brushed away, and Sam was airborne again, but this time, not toward Coldfoot. Instead, he followed a direct, low-altitude course toward a private landing strip near Eagle, Alaska, close enough to the border to make a run into Canada if things went sideways. At the same time, Lena had begun the most delicate part of the job, vanishing herself. She left behind her burner laptop, wiped clean and torched in a steel drum behind the ranger station. She erased every trace of her presence from public records, deleted her fake work IDs, and dumped the last SIM card she'd used into a frozen river. By evening, she was already on a train headed south through British Columbia under the name Eliza Harrington, with a passport she'd printed months earlier. Meanwhile, the fallout began. At 3:47 p.m., the North Ridge dispatch team realized something was wrong. The plane Sam was flying hadn't returned. It hadn't landed at its destination. There were no distress calls. No transponder signals. No mayday. It was as if the aircraft had simply disappeared into thin air. They contacted FAA regional control, then local law enforcement. Within an hour, a missing aircraft report was filed. By midnight, a small-scale search was underway, but Alaska's winter wilderness is unforgiving, and the chances of finding a downed plane without coordinates are slim to none. News of the missing flight didn't hit the public until the next day. At first, it was assumed to be a tragic accident. Local stations ran headlines about the dangers of flying through the Alaskan Triangle. But inside the walls of North Ridge, suspicion began to brew. Why had that particular flight been assigned to Sam? Why did the cargo manifest show routine supplies when internal memos confirmed cash? Why was Lena Brooks, the quiet tech contractor who had started working in their IT division just 2 months ago, suddenly unreachable? Back in Eagle, Sam changed into a new identity. He'd shaved off his beard, dyed his hair, and was wearing a set of thermal gear that made him look more like a mountaineering tourist than a former military pilot. He met Mason at a rented hunting lodge just before dusk, where the two went over the next steps. They weren't sticking around. They had a flight chartered out of Whitehorse in 48 hours, destination unknown. Only Mason knew the drop point. Only Sam knew the escape route. But one of them wasn't planning to share everything. In the quiet hours before dawn, with the wind howling against the thin walls of the hunting lodge, a shift had started to form, something unspoken, but thick in the air. Sam sensed it. Mason had grown distant, less talkative, his gaze lingering too long on the duffel bag where Sam kept the backup passports and cash for their exit. Trust, the one thing that had held the three of them together through months of planning, was cracking. And Lena, she hadn't checked in. She was supposed to send a single encrypted message once she crossed the Canadian border. A simple line of code they all agreed on, signal green. But hours passed, and no message came. Sam tried to tell himself it was a delay, that maybe she was laying low. But deep down he knew something had gone wrong. Or worse, something had changed. The next morning, Mason told Sam he was going into town to grab supplies. Food, fuel, maybe a weather update. He didn't take the truck. He left on foot. And he didn't come back. By nightfall, Sam was still alone at the cabin. The temperature dropped fast, one of those sudden cold snaps that Alaska throws at you to remind you who's in charge. Sam packed everything he could into a single backpack, left the rest behind, and hiked through the snow to the secondary rendezvous point they'd planned weeks earlier. But when he got there, Mason was already gone. Tire tracks. Cigarette butts. A small, still warm patch of ground where someone had been sitting, watching. Sam was on his own. 3 days later, local law enforcement found the North Ridge aircraft abandoned and intact near the lake bed. It had been scrubbed clean, no fingerprints, no IDs, no clues. They knew it was the missing plane only because of a partial serial number etched into the underbelly. The cache was gone. Completely. Not a trace left behind. The story exploded. Pilot disappears with millions. Inside job in Alaska. High-tech heist baffles feds. The FBI launched a formal investigation, but there was nothing to go on. No camera footage, no witnesses, and no confirmed sightings. 4 months, they dug into Sam's past, Lena's disappearance, and Mason's long wilderness record. But there was nothing solid to hold on to. Every lead went cold. Then, almost a year later, in a small village in southern Chile, a man walked into a hardware store. He paid in crisp American bills, and when he smiled, the clerk noticed something strange. His teeth were capped in gold, like something out of a western. The clerk told a friend. The friend posted online. And soon, whispers of the ghost pilot began to surface again. But by the time the FBI traced the tip, he was already gone. No fingerprints. No trail. Just the faint echo of propellers in the high Andean wind. And as for Lena? No one ever saw her again. Not officially. But in 2019, an anonymous donor gave $100,000 to a women's tech scholarship fund in Montana. The note simply read, "For the ones who disappear but still build."